Ever been told you no longer owned your own home while standing in your own driveway? Neither had I, until the day my son and daughter-in-law laughed in my face and tried to take everything my late husband and I had spent 47 years building. My name is Evelyn Parker. I am 72 years old, and until that afternoon, I believed there were some lines family would never cross. I was wrong. The lake house sat on 12 acres of land in northern Wisconsin. My husband, Richard, and I bought it when we were newly married. Back then, it was nothing more than an aging cabin with peeling paint and a leaky roof. Over the decades, we transformed it into a beautiful home overlooking the water. Every deck board, every flower bed, every tree we planted carried a memory. After Richard passed away 3 years earlier, the property became more than a house. It became the place where I felt closest to him. That Friday afternoon, I drove up the long gravel driveway expecting a quiet weekend. Instead, I saw a moving truck parked near the garage. Several men were carrying furniture from the house. For a moment, I thought there had been some kind of mistake. Then I saw my son Jason standing beside the truck. Next to him was his wife Rachel. They were smiling. Actually, smiling is not the right word. They looked pleased, proud even. I stepped out of my car and hurried toward them. "What is going on?" I asked. Jason avoided my eyes. Rachel did not. She folded her arms and looked directly at me. "You are early," she said. "Early for what?" I demanded. One of the movers carried out Richard's favorite rocking chair. My heart dropped. "Put that back," I shouted. The mover froze and looked toward Rachel. She gave a small shake of her head. Then she laughed. Not a nervous laugh. Not an embarrassed laugh. A loud, confident laugh that echoed across the yard. "You really do not know, do you?" she asked. I stared at her. "Know what?" Rachel reached into her designer handbag and removed a folder. Jason shifted uncomfortably beside her. I noticed he still would not look at me. She opened the folder and handed me several pages. "Because you do not own this property anymore." For several seconds I could not even process the words. I looked down at the documents. My hands trembled. The papers appeared official. Legal language covered every page. Then I saw something that made my stomach tighten. My name. My signature. According to the document, ownership of the lake house had been transferred months earlier. I blinked repeatedly. None of it made sense. "This is impossible," I whispered. Rachel shrugged. "The county records say otherwise." Then she laughed again. Jason finally spoke. "Mom, maybe we should talk about this calmly." I looked at him in disbelief. "Calmly? People are removing furniture from my house." Rachel stepped closer. "Not your house." The words hit H. For the rest of that afternoon, I stood in the driveway holding those papers while my entire world seemed to shift beneath my feet. The transfer date remained fixed in my mind. I knew exactly where I had been that day because it was the same week I underwent a heart procedure at a hospital in Milwaukee. I had spent 3 days under medical supervision. There was no possibility that I had driven across state lines to sign property documents. None. Yet Rachel stood there acting as though the matter had already been settled. "The county accepted the transfer," she said. "Everything is legal." Legal. The word almost made me laugh. Instead, I folded the papers carefully and placed them back inside the folder. Rachel appeared disappointed that I was not creating a scene. Jason shifted nervously. "Mom, maybe we should sit down and talk." I looked directly at him. "Did you know about this?" His eyes dropped to the gravel. That was answer enough. I turned and walked back to my car. Behind me, I could hear Rachel speaking to the movers again. By the time I reached the driver's seat, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely insert the key into the ignition. I drove straight back to my apartment in Madison. The entire 2-hour drive felt unreal. Every few miles I glanced at the passenger seat where the documents rested. The signature looked similar to mine at first glance. Similar enough to fool someone who did not know me well. But I had signed my name thousands of times over the course of 72 years. I knew every curve and stroke. Something about that signature felt stiff and unnatural. That evening I spread the papers across my dining room table and studied them under a bright lamp. The more I examined them, the more convinced I became that they were wrong. Then I noticed something else. The notary section listed a witness I had never met. I read the name 3 times. Nothing about it seemed familiar. Around 9 o'clock, my phone rang. It was my younger sister, Carol. Apparently, Rachel had already begun telling relatives that I had willingly transferred the property months ago and was now regretting the decision. The story was spreading quickly. By the next morning, 2 cousins had called asking why I was trying to take the house back from Jason. Hearing those words felt like another betrayal. People believed them. Worse, they believed them because the paperwork appeared legitimate. For the first time, I realized how dangerous a lie becomes when it is attached to official documents. Later that afternoon, I requested copies of my hospital records from the week listed on the transfer agreement. If someone wanted to claim I signed those papers, I intended to prove exactly where I had been. As I gathered records and dates, another question began bothering me. If the signature was false, who had helped create it? The answer arrived sooner than expected. Just before sunset, my phone rang again. The caller ID displayed a name I had not seen in nearly 15 years. Harold Benson, a retired employee from the county notary office. And the first thing he said was, "Evelyn, I think I know what happened to your lake house." I had not spoken to Harold Benson in more than a decade, but the seriousness in his voice immediately caught my attention. Harold had worked at the county notary office for nearly 30 years before retiring. He knew property records better than almost anyone. "What do you mean?" I asked. There was a brief silence on the line. Then Harold sighed. "I saw your name come up several months ago. Something about it bothered me." My heart began to race. I grabbed a notebook and sat at my kitchen table. "Start from the beginning." Harold explained that one of his former co-workers had mentioned an unusual property transfer involving a lake house. At the time, he did not pay much attention. Then he heard Rachel's name connected to the paperwork. That caught his attention because Rachel had visited the office more than once asking detailed questions about property transfers and survivorship rights. "I remember thinking it was strange," Harold said. "She seemed unusually interested in procedures." The knot in my stomach tightened. "Did she file the documents herself?" "No," Harold replied. "But someone clearly knew exactly what they were doing." After the call ended, I sat quietly for several minutes. Every new piece of information seemed to point in the same direction. This was not a misunderstanding. It was a plan. Yet proving a plan and proving a crime were two very different things. The next few days became some of the loneliest of my life. Family members continued calling. Some sounded concerned. Others sounded irritated. A few openly suggested that I should let the matter go. One cousin even told me that maybe I had forgotten signing the papers. Hearing that hurt more than I expected. I had spent my entire life managing finances, running businesses with my husband, and handling legal documents. Now people were questioning my memory simply because I was 72 years old. Meanwhile, Jason and Rachel appeared completely confident. Social media photographs began appearing online showing them spending weekends at the lake house. Friends commented on how beautiful the property was. Rachel responded to several comments by calling it their forever home. Every post felt like a deliberate insult. Then, 3 days after speaking with Harold, another surprise arrived. A certified envelope appeared in my mailbox. Inside was a packet of hospital records I had requested. I carefully reviewed every page. Admission forms, nursing notes, medication schedules, treatment records. Every document confirmed exactly what I already knew. On the day I supposedly signed away my property, I was in a hospital bed recovering from a medical procedure. I highlighted the dates and organized everything into a folder. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt a small sense of hope. Facts mattered. Evidence mattered. And unlike rumors, evidence could not be laughed away. That evening, Harold called again. This time his voice sounded different. More urgent. "Evelyn," he said, "I spoke with someone who was working at the office the week your transfer was recorded." I sat upright immediately. And there was another pause. "She remembers something very important." My pulse quickened. "What is it?" Harold took a slow breath. "According to her, the woman who signed those documents did not look anything like you." Harold gave me the woman's phone number the following morning. I stared at the piece of paper for nearly an hour before gathering the courage to call. If what she remembered was accurate, everything could change. The woman introduced herself as Nancy Whitaker. She had worked in the county records office for almost 20 years before retiring. The moment I mentioned the lake house transfer, her tone became serious. "I have been thinking about that transaction ever since Harold called me," she said. Something felt off about it. My heart began pounding. I asked her to explain. Nancy told me that on the day the paperwork was submitted, she happened to be helping at the front counter because another employee was out sick. She remembered the transfer because the property involved waterfront land and a fairly high value. According to her, The woman who appeared to sign the documents was much younger than 72. I did not know who she was, Nancy said, but I remember thinking she looked closer to 40. I closed my eyes. Rachel was 41. Are you certain? I asked. As certain as I can be after all this time, Nancy replied. Then she added something even more surprising. The woman was wearing large sunglasses indoors and seemed reluctant to speak. Most of the conversation was handled by another person standing beside her. A man? I asked. Yes, Nancy said. Middle-aged. Dark hair. Confident. He seemed to know exactly what documents needed to be filed. When the call ended, I sat silently at my kitchen table. For the first time, I was no longer dealing with vague suspicions. I had a witness. Not proof yet, but a witness. Later that afternoon, I met with attorney Linda Foster. A friend had recommended her years earlier during a property dispute involving another family. Within 15 minutes of reviewing my documents, she stopped taking notes and looked directly at me. Evelyn, if your hospital records are accurate and this witness is credible, we may be dealing with far more than a family disagreement. Those words brought me a strange sense of relief. Finally, someone was taking me seriously. Linda spent the next hour organizing timelines, names, and dates. She requested copies of every document I possessed. Before I left her office, she asked a question nobody else had asked. Has anyone checked for security footage? I frowned. Security footage? Linda nodded. County buildings often maintain surveillance archives, sometimes longer than people realize. The possibility had never occurred to me. My pulse quickened. If cameras existed, they could reveal exactly who appeared at the office that day. Linda immediately began making calls. 2 days later, she phoned me with an urgency I had not heard before. I found something, she said. I gripped the phone tightly. What is it? There was a pause. Then Linda answered. The cameras from that week were not destroyed, and someone has already requested copies of the footage before we did. Linda's statement stayed with me all night. Someone had requested the surveillance footage before we did. That meant one thing. Whoever helped transfer my property knew there was something on those recordings worth seeing. The next morning I met Linda at her office. She already had several folders spread across her conference table. The moment I walked in, I could tell she had not slept much either. The request was made about 6 weeks ago, she said. Long before you challenged the transfer. My stomach tightened. Who made it? Linda shook her head. The county will not release that information without a formal proceeding. But they confirmed the request exists. I sat down slowly. Every answer seemed to create 2 new questions. Linda slid another document toward me. There is more. According to the county records, several other transactions involving the lake house had occurred during the previous year. Small transactions, easy to overlook. Utility accounts, storage agreements, property management authorizations. Individually, they seemed harmless. Together, they painted a troubling picture. Someone had been preparing to take control of the property long before I discovered the transfer. This was planned, I whispered. Linda nodded. Very carefully. Over the next week, we began tracing every document connected to the house. The deeper we looked, the worse it became. Multiple signatures supposedly belonging to me appeared on forms I had never seen. Some were convincing. Others contained obvious differences. Linda hired a handwriting expert to review them. Meanwhile, I continued receiving calls from relatives. Most still believed Jason and Rachel. Their version of events was simple. Mine required explanations, timelines, and evidence. People often choose the simpler story. Then something unexpected happened. Jason called me. It was the first time he had contacted me directly since the confrontation at the lake house. His voice sounded strained. Mom, can we talk? For a brief moment, I hoped he wanted to tell the truth. Instead, he spent 15 minutes urging me to stop pursuing the matter. This is tearing the family apart, he said. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. The family was torn apart when someone tried to take my home. There was a long silence. Then he said something that caught my attention immediately. You do not understand everything that happened. My pulse quickened. Then explain it. Another silence followed. I cannot. Before I could ask another question, he ended the call. That conversation bothered me for days. Jason sounded nervous. Not angry. Not confident like Rachel. Nervous. It was the first crack I had seen in their united front. Then, on a rainy Thursday afternoon, Linda called again. This time she sounded excited. Evelyn, the footage has finally been released. My heart nearly stopped. What does it show? There was a pause long enough to make me grip the phone tighter. Then Linda answered. It shows a woman entering the county office wearing oversized sunglasses. And Evelyn, you are not going to believe who she was standing next to. For several seconds I could not speak. Linda rarely sounded surprised, which made her reaction even more unsettling. Who was it? I finally asked. Come to the office, she said. You need to see it yourself. Less than an hour later, I sat in a conference room staring at a paused surveillance image on a large monitor. The footage was grainy but clear enough to identify faces. A woman wearing oversized sunglasses walked through the entrance exactly as Nancy had described. Beside her stood a man carrying a folder. The moment the image sharpened, my breath caught in my throat. It was not a stranger. It was not some professional criminal. It was Jason, my own son. I stared at the screen in disbelief. Part of me had suspected he knew more than he admitted. Seeing him, there was different. Seeing him escort the woman into the office turned suspicion into reality. Linda pressed play. We watched silently as the pair approached the counter. The woman kept her head lowered. Jason handled most of the conversation. Several minutes later, they disappeared into an interior office where the transfer documents were processed. When the video ended, the room fell silent. Can we identify the woman? I asked. Linda nodded slowly. Not yet with certainty, but we have another angle. She switched to a second camera view. The woman removed her sunglasses briefly while leaving the building. The image froze. I leaned forward. My pulse raced. The resemblance was unmistakable. The woman looked remarkably similar to Rachel's older sister, Melissa. I had met Melissa only a handful of times over the years, but the facial features were difficult to ignore. Linda folded her arms. The resemblance alone is not enough for court, but it gives us somewhere to look. Over the following week, the investigation accelerated. The handwriting expert completed his report. Multiple signatures connected to the property transfer were deemed highly inconsistent with authentic samples of my writing. The hospital records established my location. The witness statements supported our timeline. Now the surveillance footage connected Jason directly to the transaction. The walls were beginning to close in. Then something unexpected happened. Rachel stopped posting photographs from the lake house. Her social media accounts became unusually quiet. Even relatives who previously defended her started asking questions. Rumors were spreading. For the first time, the confidence Rachel displayed in my driveway began to disappear. Meanwhile, Linda uncovered another troubling detail. Several bank transfers had occurred shortly after the property changed ownership. Money moved through multiple accounts before being deposited into a joint investment account connected to Jason and Rachel. The amounts were not enormous individually, but together they represented a significant sum. Someone expected to profit from this quickly, Linda said. That evening I sat alone looking through old family albums. Photograph after photograph showed birthdays, fishing trips, summer barbecues, and holidays at the lake house. Jason smiled in nearly every picture. I kept asking myself the same question. When had he crossed the line from son to participant? Had Rachel convinced him? Had he convinced himself? Or had greed simply grown one small decision at a time? The next morning my phone rang. It was Linda. Her voice was calm, but I could hear excitement underneath it. Evelyn, she said, we finally obtained the email records. I sat upright immediately. What did you find? There was a brief pause. Then she answered. We now know who planned the entire thing. And it was not Jason. For a long moment after ending the call, I simply sat there staring at the wall. Not Jason. The words echoed in my mind. If Jason had not planned everything, then who had? I drove to Linda's office immediately. When I arrived, several printed emails were spread across the conference table. Linda pointed toward a stack of documents. These came from records obtained through discovery requests connected to the property dispute. I pulled out a chair and began reading. The first few messages appeared harmless. Discussions about finances, questions about property taxes, maintenance expenses. Then the tone changed. Rachel's name appeared repeatedly. The deeper I read, the more uncomfortable I became. Months before the transfer occurred, Rachel had been researching ownership structures, notary requirements, and methods for transferring real estate interests. One message described the lake house as an underutilized asset. Another referred to future opportunities once control of the property changed. My stomach tightened. Linda handed me another page. Read this one. The email came from Rachel to her sister Melissa. The date was nearly a year before the transfer. Most of the message discussed family matters. Then one paragraph stopped me cold. Rachel wrote that everything depended on getting Jason to cooperate. I read the sentence twice. Then a third time. Jason was not leading the plan. He was being persuaded to participate in it. The realization did not excuse his actions, but it explained his behavior. His nervous phone call, his hesitation, his inability to look me in the eye. Linda slid another document toward me. This one was even worse. Several email exchanges revealed that Rachel had been coordinating meetings, collecting information, and managing timelines. The property transfer was not a spontaneous decision. It had been organized over many months. Every step seemed calculated, every detail prepared in advance. Then I reached a message that made my hands tremble. Rachel wrote that once ownership changed, nobody would question the outcome because elderly people often forgot things. I felt physically sick. My age had become part of the strategy. They expected people to doubt me before they doubted official paperwork. For the first time since this ordeal began, anger replaced heartbreak. Not anger because of the house. Anger because someone believed they could erase a lifetime of credibility with a few carefully chosen assumptions. Linda continued organizing the evidence. The surveillance footage, the witness statement, the handwriting analysis, the hospital records, the bank transfers. Now the emails connected everything together. The pattern was becoming impossible to deny. Late that afternoon, another unexpected development occurred. Jason called again. His voice sounded exhausted. "Mom, I need to talk to you." I remained silent. "Please," he said. "There are things you do not know." The sadness in his voice sounded genuine, but I no longer trusted words. "Then tell them to Linda," I replied. He hesitated. "Rachel does not know I am calling." That sentence immediately captured my attention. Before I could respond, he continued. "I made mistakes. A lot of mistakes. But there is one thing you need to understand before this goes to court." My pulse quickened. "What is it?" Jason took a long breath. Then he said the one thing I never expected to hear. Rachel was not the only member of the family involved in the plan. Jason agreed to meet the following evening. Linda insisted on attending, and I was grateful for it. Whatever happened next, I wanted a witness. We met at a quiet restaurant halfway between Madison and Milwaukee. When Jason walked in, he looked older than I remembered. Not physically older, but worn down. The confidence I had seen beside Rachel in my driveway was gone. He sat across from us and stared at the table for several seconds before speaking. "I know I do not deserve your trust," he said, "but I am tired of lying." Linda opened a notebook. "Start from the beginning." Jason nodded slowly. What he told us changed the entire picture. According to him, Rachel had spent years building support for the property transfer. She talked constantly about financial security and future planning. At first, Jason resisted. The lake house had always belonged to me. He knew what it meant to me. But over time, Rachel convinced him that ownership should eventually pass to them anyway. Then another family member became involved. Rachel's sister Melissa. The same Melissa who appeared in the surveillance footage. Melissa worked in administrative services for a private consulting company and often handled paperwork. According to Jason, she offered suggestions about how transfers worked and how documents were processed. My stomach tightened as I listened. The pieces were finally fitting together. Did Melissa impersonate me? I asked quietly. Jason lowered his head. His silence lasted long enough to become an answer. "I never thought it would go that far," he said. "By the time I realized what was happening, I had already helped create the situation." Linda continued taking notes. Then she asked the question that mattered most. "Can you prove any of this?" Jason looked up. "Yes." Both of us froze. He reached into a folder and removed several printed emails. They were messages exchanged between Rachel and Melissa. Unlike the earlier emails we had discovered, these were direct and specific. They discussed dates, signatures, appointments, and the transfer itself. One message even referenced making sure Evelyn remained in the hospital during a critical filing period. I felt physically ill reading it. My medical recovery had been treated like a scheduling advantage. Then Jason revealed something even more important. Several weeks earlier, Rachel had become nervous after learning that questions were being asked about the property. She began deleting messages and moving documents. But she overlooked one thing. Cloud backups. Copies of the conversations still existed. Linda's eyes widened as she reviewed the material. For the first time since this nightmare began, I saw genuine optimism on her face. "This changes everything," she said. Jason nodded sadly. "I know." The following week, the case moved toward a formal hearing. Rachel suddenly stopped communicating with relatives. Melissa hired an attorney. The confidence that once fueled their laughter had disappeared. Meanwhile, our evidence continued growing stronger. Hospital records, witness statements, surveillance footage, financial transfers, email chains, cloud backups. One by one, every piece connected. Then, 3 days before the hearing, Linda received notice that Rachel's legal team wanted an emergency settlement discussion. And when Linda finished reading the proposal, she looked directly at me and said, "Evelyn, they are offering to return the property before the judge sees what we have." When Linda told me they wanted to return the property before the hearing, I felt something I had not expected. It was not satisfaction. It was not relief. It was certainty. They knew they were going to lose. For months, Rachel had acted as though the outcome was already decided. She laughed in my driveway. She called the lake house her forever home. She counted on everyone believing an official document over a 72-year-old widow. Now she wanted the entire matter to disappear before the evidence became public. Linda asked what I wanted to do. The answer came easily. We go forward. 3 days later, we walked into the courthouse. Rachel sat beside her attorney. Melissa sat several rows behind her. Neither woman looked confident anymore. Jason was there as well. He looked exhausted but calm. He had already agreed to cooperate fully and provide records that supported the truth. The hearing lasted most of the day. One by one, the evidence was presented. First came the hospital records proving I was more than 100 miles away on the day the transfer supposedly occurred. Then came the witness testimony from Nancy Whitaker. After that, the surveillance footage appeared on the courtroom screens. The room became silent as everyone watched the woman in sunglasses enter the county office beside Jason. Then the handwriting expert explained why the signatures were inconsistent with authentic samples of my writing. Linda followed with the email records, the cloud backups, the financial transfers, and the timeline connecting every event. Each piece strengthened the next. The story Rachel told began to collapse under its own weight. By the end of the afternoon, the picture was impossible to ignore. This had never been a misunderstanding. It had been a coordinated effort to take property that did not belong to them. When the judge finally spoke, his words were direct. The transfer documents were declared invalid. Ownership of the lake house and all associated assets was restored to me immediately. Additional actions would address the remaining financial issues, but the most important decision had already been made. My home was mine again. For the first time in months, I felt the weight lift from my shoulders. Outside the courthouse, reporters were not waiting. There were no dramatic celebrations. Just a quiet parking lot beneath a clear Wisconsin sky. Rachel left quickly without speaking. Melissa followed. Jason remained. He walked over slowly and stood beside me. Neither of us spoke for several moments. Then he apologized. Not with excuses. Not with explanations. Just an apology. I told him rebuilding trust would take time. He nodded because he already knew. A week later, I returned to the lake house. The moving trucks were gone. The furniture had been returned. The lake looked exactly as it had for decades. I sat in Richard's old rocking chair on the porch and watched the water move beneath the afternoon sun. For months I had focused on what I lost. Now I realized something else. I had gained proof that truth still mattered. Evidence still mattered. And no amount of laughter could change facts. As the sun began to set across the lake, I thought about the day Rachel stood in my driveway and told me I no longer owned my own home. She believed the story was over. In reality, it had only just begun. Because in the end, the property came back to me. More importantly, so did my dignity, my voice, and the peace that nobody would ever take away again.